in a minute. So thanks for coming to session 4 of Transitioning to Retirement for Academics. We're thrilled to have you back with us, and we're excited today to introduce to you Carol Kirschnitt. Carol is a licensed clinical psychologist and the director of the Academic and Staff Assistance Program at UC Davis Health. Her 25 plus years of clinical experience include working in university counseling centers, hospital settings, employee assistance programs, and private practice. And I can tell you from having attended this session the last 4 years, it's a pleasure to have Carol with us, and it's got a lot of great information to share to make it a little bit easier for you to transition to retirement and things outside of just your pension and health benefits. So Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kyle. And I will work on sharing my screen. It was an interesting challenge for me technically. Hi, everyone. Oh, my screen sharing is disabled, you guys. So maybe
you should be good to go. Try it once more.
Let's give it a go. Ah, there it is. Very good. All right then. Great. Put this up here and get it back to the start. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 4th in the series of retirement classes. And I know you've had 3 probably very amazing weeks learning about, all the different ins and outs of our retirement system, which is good. And I think, sorry, let me go back to the start with this. Do this to your eyes, but so this session's a little bit different, I suspect, in that we're talking, more about sort of the psychological transition from working to being retired. And I think that's an interesting topic, and one that is getting a little bit more attention these days, but often sort of an afterthought in some of this. So I'm delighted that this has been included in these presentations because I think it's an important part. One thing I often ask groups when I'm actually in the room with you, and I'm sort of kind of in the room with you, is if you're inclined and comfortable doing this, go ahead and enter into the chat, your name, what it is you do here, how long you've been doing it, and if you're comfortable sharing when you're thinking about retiring. And again, if you're not comfortable sharing that, you can share any and all or none, whatever feels best. I don't need to out anyone's plans, if they're not comfortable doing that. But I'm always impressed, over the years, I've been impressed with the real range and how people approach their thinking about retirement. And they're teaching versions of this course for a while now. And one thing I find is, there are people who are very big planners, a decade ahead are really starting to get it together to figure this out. And other people are like, hey, I'm retiring this afternoon. So I think there's a lot of ways to approach that and deal with it. So not necessarily a right or wrong way, but yeah, all right, 33 years, very good. I'm always impressed also with the amount of time that people have in. You often have people who spend a good long time here, so it's going to be a big, that'll be an interesting and big change. Nobody gets away from me, just to warn you right up front, without a little public service announcement regarding ASAP, or the Academic and Staff Assistance Program. I assume that folks have been around have probably heard of us. Sometimes, interestingly enough, faculty often have less awareness of us than staff. We are a program that serves, everybody. We are your on-site, free, confidential employee assistance program. And we are a small but mighty set of mental health professionals, 3.5 psychologists, a social worker, and postdoc and a program assistant over at Health. And I know a similarly sized staff on the main campus, which is a separate and independent program, but definitely, we collaborate and cooperate quite a lot. And so ASAP exists on both sides of campus. And I will note, we serve everyone who gets a paycheck from either of the campuses, and also their adult family members and or significant others. So we do a little couples work with folks, and we will see people's spouses, partners, adult children, things like that. We also see retirees, so that's maybe an important piece for you, as we go through this. And if any of the topics that come up in here, you feel like, wow, it would help me individually to kick around some of this a little bit more, and my spouse and I should probably sit down and just talk to someone about how we're going to work out some things with this next phase, do consider using our services. So happy to answer questions about that. And we do a lot of kind of, brief counseling for folks. And EAP isn't really long-term therapy, but definitely, handful of sessions to figure out what's going on, to help to sort of define the problem or the set of issues, look at a few different options for how one might approach that and give you our best recommendations. We know a lot about your health insurance, a lot about resources on campus and in the community. We do a lot of manager, supervisor consultation around mental health concerns. We consult with peers basically on mental health concerns. We do a lot of crisis intervention, certainly over at health. Things happen and groups need us to come and help them process some hard things. We do a lot of teaching and training and providing information to people. And I'm very proud of our program. It feels it's very, very helpful. I do think we're a nice place, a safe spot if you have kind of an odd question around mental health or resources or kinds of things, and you don't really know where to start. We can't answer all questions, but we certainly typically can tell you where you might get a question answered. So that feels important. So do think about that. So, all right, off we go. And I do also encourage people, I don't want to talk at you for a long time here. If you have question or comment or concern, either use the chat if that's comfortable for you, or feel free to unmute and pipe up. I will ask people to interact a little bit as we go, because that just makes this a more interesting thing. And again, this is your individual retirement, so you want to figure out what works best for you. I always like to start with Groucho. One thing I always wanted to do before I quit is to retire. So feel that. Standard definitions of retirement are, they're a lot about ending, ending and leaving things. We look at, retreating and receding and withdrawing from things and, retiring to bed, those kinds of things. So it feels a lot about ending. And I think if we're going to talk about healthy adult development, we really need to look at retirement as kind of a series of transitions that are going to begin a new era of our life. And I always, share that I remember as a little kid learning that the word commencement didn't mean end, it meant beginning. And so I often think of retirement in some similar ways. So, and I think that's important because, as we get closer, there are aspects of it that feel a little bit scary to some of us. So. Nancy Schlossberg, psychologist who's done a lot of work on retirement. She's an educational psychologist, a professor from the University of Maryland. She is retired. I love her interest in work in retirement all happened, of course, after she was retired. And her story is very classic in some ways. And you'll probably appreciate this from a faculty perspective, as she, shortly after retiring, she was at a cocktail party with some people in conversation, meets a new person. And of course, here comes the question, well, so what do you do? And she said she kind of flipped out in that moment a little bit like, what do I do? I'm retired. Like, what does that mean? And really got her looking at this area and then embarking on this whole new line of research, So one of the things people do in retirement is more work. I like her thought, though. I think of retirement as the bridge between leaving one set of roles, relationships, routines, and assumptions and developing a new set. It is a transition to what's next. So I think that's really, really important because I think the ending and the loss and some of the things that go with that can really start to loom up as we get close. And I think the more we've identified with our jobs, the bigger that can feel to us. So the whole idea that there's life beyond this, I know we know this intellectually, but I think emotionally sometimes it feels scary. And I love this cartoon. With Leonardo, it's never retirement, it's always reinvention. So let's enjoy that one. All right. As of now, these stats go up and down, and one of the frustrations with stats around work and things is they're slow to get published. So by the time they're published, we're into some new phase. But basically, it looks, I was trying to gather a variety of different things, and it still looks like the average age of retirement in the US is roughly 63. We have seen, I will note, in the last couple of years, I think between 2008 and 2019, roughly 1 million people in the United States between the ages of 55 and it's older than that retired. And in the last 2 years, 3.5 million people have retired in that same age group. So more people are bailing out of the workplace now. And I mean, you could go into a long conversation about why that is. Um, I know certainly at the Med Center, we've seen an exodus for some of our healthcare providers more than in typical previous years. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Not the least of which is I think people have had a lot of time to reflect on kind of, existential questions about the meaning of life and things like that. And so I think are making some different choices with that. So anyway, lot of things to think about and ponder. I have a feeling we'll be sort of trying to understand this phase of time for a long time to come. Right now, statistically, the average length of retirement is around 18 years. And, we're living longer, though, all the time. And so I think that time, if we're retiring earlier, which, typically over the last 100 years, we've started to retire a little bit earlier, that amount of time is getting bigger, which is sort of interesting and cool. So, Schlossberg and others have posed a variety of different sort of huge questions, and I throw these out here to ponder with the acknowledgement that they're large and almost unwieldy to consider at times. But I think there's a few things that we want to be paying attention to, and quite a few, frankly. But first, are you ready to leave what you've been doing? And that's a hard question. I often think, on some days at work, like, yes, ma'am, I'm very ready to leave what I've been doing. But, when I really think and reflect on a standard day or in the middle of some of my work, most of us have a certain passion and commitment to our work. And so that's a harder question, so it kind of depends on where you're at. I think it is easier to think about that if we have something that we're going to. And so that gets us to the next questions, which is gigantic. Are you prepared for the challenges of creating a new life? Obviously, you have a life, so it's not going to be all new, but kind of mapping out a routine and a set of activities and involvements and things that are going to, kind of fill in the space where a lot of your sort of standard job work has been. It's kind of a big project in some ways. So that's worth contemplating. These questions are also sort of large. So again, I know that maybe we should get more specific ones. But do you have resources to create your new life? And resources meaning, obviously in the concrete, financial type resources, physical resources. But also emotional resources, looking at other things, psychological capacity to do certain things and to make those changes. What really is going to be involved in that? What will I need? I'll need people, money, time, stuff like that to kind of get to that life I'm trying to develop. And so are those things all in order? And I know you've all been looking at that probably pretty closely in here. Most people do. Is your total financial and emotional situation good? I just laugh at that question. That feels like that's okay. That's a lot of stuff. Again, you've spent some time, running all the numbers probably and figuring things out. This, it's uncertainty in every piece of this. We don't know how long we'll live and how much money we'll need and all that kind of stuff. But I think we can ballpark a lot of that and come up with a plan that works. The emotional situation, that feels, I don't even know what that means. Is my emotional situation good? I think that gets to my attitude, my comfort with change, and some other things we're going to discuss this afternoon. But, really looking at that, taking a little bit of an inventory and some of that is important. These two questions feel especially germane when I think about retirement. Are there supports you can count on? Other people, who's going to be part of your situation with this. And I know, I'm at a point in my life where, some of my peers are definitely moving into this space now. And so we're having some conversations. A lot of people, they're checking some things like, hey, Carol, do you think you're going to want to do this? Like, because I want to be sure someone will do this with me when I'm retired, kind of thing. And so people are checking that, which I think is, important because, it's like, well, it's all cool if I have time to do these things, but if I'm doing them all by myself, maybe, well, how's that going to be? And people who will help you sort of navigate this change, still hopefully feel good about yourself, how to start to establish, a new routine and situation for yourself. Question 6 is, I think, probably a key one. Have you coped well with other transitions? Psychologists get asked a lot to predict human behavior, which is a completely imperfect science for sure. It's getting better, but it's never going to be anywhere near 100%. But past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. It's one of our standard lines. And so, if you've been, okay with change and sort of managing that, sort of have a certain optimism about that, that can be all right. I laugh. I mean, I think we've all had to really step up our capacity to manage change of late. And so maybe we've uncovered some realization that we're better at this than we thought. I know I've kind of been reflecting on that a bit myself, just the things we've had to deal with. So I do think that's an important thing to look at. And just because you're not a big fan of change doesn't mean you can't make a change. It just means you're going to have to be gentler with yourself and maybe build in more supports and a little more time and some things like that to make it work for you. So, but good to think about so you can sort of have a sense of things. And then some kind of personality variables. Are you an optimist? We all try to be optimistic, I think. If you tend to be, part of the 10-ish% of people who struggle with, say, a little bit of depression or things like that, that's harder for those folks, I think, to make sense of this or to feel hopeful and positive about what's going to happen. I think people who tend to be a little bit more depressed can actually, more easily see the downside of things. Glasses have to empty. And so I think have to work a little bit harder to get comfortable with, the positive angles of things, but not impossible. People definitely do. And then finally, the issue of patience. I wouldn't tell you I'm an especially patient person, although occasionally I find wells of that I didn't expect to see in myself. I think this is a really important variable because a lot of the literature about retirement does get into this idea. And again, people often ask, like, how long is this going to change, going to last for me? Different experiences, grief, certain things people want to know, like, what's the standard time frame? These are all rather arbitrary, but the time frame that people talk about a lot, so I think it's sort of curious, I'll share, is that a lot of people cite this kind of 2-year, around 2-year thing where from the point when you actually retire to the point when you're kind of settled comfortably into a routine, a groove that's really working for you. And probably in that time, you've tried a few things. So you're like, well, I'm not really feeling that. So a few false starts perhaps, and just getting adjusted and checking out a variety of different options. Being a good scientist probably. But so I guess that's a long way about saying it, be gentle with yourself in here. I think, you won't have it all figured out, overnight. And I think the fact that you're here and you're thinking about it and considering it and getting ready for this is important, and hopefully gets you a leg up, going through it, but you still have to have the experience. And I think that's, so just know that it won't happen instantaneously. So, and then that's okay. So indeed, some people spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than they do their retirement. I'm going to share some old research, but it kind of stands up. So I'm going to share it because it's just a good example. Rosencoder and Garris did a study, a relatively large study at the time, it was a large multi-site, I think it was a big insurance company in the southeastern United States, and they did a survey thing of retirees, and they had almost a 50% response, which is pretty good for social science. And they asked people, so how'd you plan for your retirement? And impressively, and I don't think this has changed a whole heck of a lot, is that like a full third of the people in their sample actually said nothing. I just jumped, And they also asked him, like, well, what would you recommend to somebody who is kind of gearing up and moving towards this? And what they found, there were huge differences in what they said they had done and what they would recommend others do. So there's a kind of a learning from some of that, which I think is important. So probably no huge surprises in here, but, people said, oh, heck, we probably should have looked a little bit more at like how is this really going to go? How is my life going to look? How is it going to use my time? What would that adjustment feel like? A lot of people have acknowledged, and I hear this a lot now, actually, that people, don't always communicate with their close people about the plan. We do this. We've been in a relationship a long time, married 100 years, whatever, and so we assume our partner or people are sort of on the same page. Of course, we're going to do this or this. It's not always the case. So you really want to check in on some of that and have some actual conversations. You might find yourself surprised. One of the times, an interesting time when people enter couples counseling is when the second person retires. And the first person has got this entire lovely situation going on for themselves, a whole set of things. And here comes the second person who has expectations about how they're going to connect up with the first person. And sometimes those expectations are not shared. So again, I don't really beat that point to death, but I've been impressed sometimes to see like, oh, no, I didn't want to play cards with you on Tuesday afternoon. I'm going to go off with my friends for this walk and whatever. So, different kinds of ideas. So, looking at that and looking at life after retirement more generally, what are the ideas? What are the things you want to do and when you kind of want to do them? Obviously, we all need to prepare for, the remainder of our lives, whatever that's going to look like. And of course, the things you've been doing the last 3 sessions, the financial stuff, the investments, the healthcare, and really understanding the retirement benefits. And if you've missed any of those are awesome classes. I hear amazing things about them. And so well worth it. I don't know that anyone plans for mental health considerations about anything. My bias is we probably should. But people, from this survey also said, I didn't realize I was gonna, I might feel this or that way. A lot of times people will notice spike in anxiety and depression around this time. Again, most people focused on the financial stuff and really being sure they could, manage their bills and their responsibilities. What these guys found, and I hope this is changing, I think we've moved to be a more active culture over time. But in their sample, they found that people were kind of had replaced a lot of work time with sedentary activities, like, oh, I'll just sit here and watch some TV or, hang out over here. And, watching TV, stuff like that, not necessarily, kind of big active moving around stuff. And the other thing they noted was about 20% of the sample had symptoms of depression. And, that's above the national norm. So I think that's sort of interesting too, to kind of think about. So I think paying attention to that. And part of that probably is, again, we can't predict how we're going to feel. And perhaps, if we had thought like, gosh, I want to be sure I have certain things in place, I might not maybe have quite as much of a hard transition. So, don't simply retire from something, have something to retire to. And I'll note too, I am, I think any of us at any level of work can have an investment in our jobs, but I do feel for faculty, I think there's even a higher identification with work. Work is a passion typically, and a defining feature of self. So I think, there's a lot of things that make this transition kind of interesting in ways. I mean, you're not going to lose all that wisdom and knowledge and years of experience. And but yeah, the shifting into sort of not being a faculty person, like what does that mean? And so I think there's some kind of large existential identity questions, and we'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, if you're going to retire, in your early 60s or whatever, you probably, and you're in reasonably good health, you probably have a few good years ahead. How will you spend your time? So those are the important things that they recommended. And staying engaged in the world around you, really getting out and making a point, and, starting to develop things. In the morning session today, people were great. They were talking a little bit about, I've started to do these things, kind of planted some seeds about what I'm going to be doing. And I'm hoping that, I'll get to spend a little more time in some of those. And if some of those things don't really germinate into something I'm that interested in, fine, but at least I'm starting to sort of, develop some things that could grow in the future. I always harp at groups about self-care and, the activities we need to just kind of maintain some steadiness, psychological steadiness, if as it were. And I think we all should have a set of activities and practices and things that we have in our day-to-day stuff, part of our routine, that keep us good, or as good as we're going to be. And I think that's true when you look at the activities, planning for retirement and looking at that. I think we have to, I think those activities have to be diverse because they have to accommodate a variety of different conditions we may encounter in our experience and, day to day. So I think we have to have things that are sedentary things that we might, at points when we, are injured or can't do certain things. It's nice to have stuff that we can comfortably do that doesn't involve a lot of activity. I think it's really, really important that we also stay active as much as we can. There's definitely a whole use it or lose it philosophy of aging. I think we have things we do that we just do by ourselves, so we don't need a whole entourage to do those things. And then things that involve other people, I think that's a really important component. Things that are purely leisure and recreational just for fun, and things that might be more purposeful or more, more involved in, achieving some goal and doing something like that. And again, as I said before, many people have some ideas. People always say, I'm going to take care of my grandkids. I'm going to be, spending more golfing with my husband. I'm going to do, again, just check all that and discuss your expectations. So no surprises for you or for them. I would like to ask people if you're willing to either unmute or type things into the chat, whatever your introversion or extroversion takes you to. I'm curious, as you look ahead and really think about retirement, what are some of the things that you envision you will gain in this next chapter? Oh, ahead of myself. Get to the next question before.
Don't be shy.
Thank you, Julian. All right, somebody chatted at me. Let's see. Here we go. All right, time. Yes, right? A chance to do something different, less stress, freedom, time, and independence, more control of time. Time is the ultimate commodity for sure. Yes, and with time, yeah, with freedom and that for sure. Great. Any other thoughts? Any other? Yeah, less stress. No, that's good. Thank you. Well, as sort of forecast here, obviously the next question is sort of the other side of the coin, and all change involves, so I've got another chat. Let's peek at that. More flexibility in time. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Having the more time and I think a little more control over, our schedule and our routine is a big deal. And a lot of you all have had more, more autonomous work, but still, well, what about this? As you look ahead, the obvious next question, and picture your retirement. What are some things that you will lose or have a fear or concern about losing? And these, this gets us into the correlation with aging. Yeah, there you go. Tired of the bureaucracy. Yes. Thank you for saying that. I joke and I often talk about this, and I'm serious. I have a kind of a running list in my head of things I will not miss. And it gets longer all the time. It's really handy when you're having a bad day of just like, whoop, like I'm not going to miss that. Yes, things you're going to lose: identity, sense of purpose, the interactions with all the different people. Yeah, students. Indeed. Yeah. Yeah, the structure. Yeah. Someone said this morning, he said, boy, I realize as I think about this, how much I really need a routine. Yeah, the academic community, that, yeah, right. There's some people we see at work, and like that's where we see them, and we spend a lot of time there. So, um, yeah, yeah. Well, I do. I always include a little bit about aging in this presentation because I do. I think, and we'll get into that a bit. Yeah, yeah, missing the joy you feel from your job, and that's the thing. We want to leave in a way where we still feel really good about it, but then we miss it more. I think that's an interesting one. Um, and many of us have great joy from our work. So, um, yeah, thank you for adding that. Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot, to look at with this, and I think it's a big deal, and I think it's something that it's not as clear to us until we get closer to it, how that feels. But all right, okay, so I will make us talk a little bit about aging, just to you know kind of get to that. Whoops, I went far away, didn't I? Nope, I didn't. All right. Um, I inherited this presentation or aspects of it from my predecessor, Jim Burnham, who, as he was approaching retirement, prepared this, a version of this talk. It's been revised a bit over the years, but um, it's kind of part of his own personal therapy, I think, to prepare for this change himself. And I've lifted a few slides, and this is one, the multiple choice test about aging. Um, aging is a complicated concept, and certainly in Western American culture, we're not real kind about aging. Aging is, definitely is fraught with some negative connotations. I try to think of it in a few different ways. In other cultures, that's not always the case. I mean, we revere our elders and certain kinds of things, but there's a lot of different meanings about aging, and I think that's maybe the more important piece. And from the most negative, decay, everything's downhill from 20, um, to kind of it being sort of the more natural course of things, a seasonal change, and aging just being one piece of that. Um, and then, of course, the full lifespan approach, continue development right up until the end there, fine wine. And then, of course, I think is probably the right answer is all of the above. So definitely some good stuff and some hard stuff, and it's definitely challenging. I think it's certainly better than not aging, right? But I think, it's a lot to take in, and I think we often have a variety of different feelings about that, and that is definitely embedded in this transition. So I think it adds something to it in ways that sometimes are challenging. I don't know if I have any psychology professors in the group, but so I'm trying not to do a horrible job of doing a mini little developmental psych thing. I just think it's kind of important and interesting to look at this. Kind of pulling off Eric Erickson's stuff a little bit, but others as well. A whole lot of the lifespan is pretty well prescribed, and that's the whole point of this diagram. Really, is that when we're kids, think about 0 to 12, or even 0 to 1. I mean, there's a lot going on, and they were very, very protected. There's huge amounts of growth and development and change, a lot of learning, a lot of the basic stuff, arguably some of the main things you need to know for life you get in kindergarten. It's a lot happening. Everyone's telling you what to do. It's very structured. You kind of go with the program typically. And, then you're a teenager, which is, a whole other huge, growth spurt on all these different levels, cognitive, emotional, social, sexual, everything. Sure, it doesn't have to be traumatic. I think that might be a little dramatic to say it that way, but it's, it can be a bit turbulent just because there's a lot of change happening at once, and you're going from being a kid to, well, being an older kid. I think in a lot of ways, in our culture, I think we protract that development. I think we don't really hit young adulthood and in its full specter probably till around 25. And prefrontal cortex is developed in that. But young adulthood also, we're really busy. We're, establishing ourselves. in careers and professions, where maybe getting into some of our, first serious, big committed relationship kind of stuff. Um, and again, we're busy. It's productive and busy, and we're building stuff. And then, of course, a place where many of us are at now is this, middle age and mature adulthood. A lot of which is around generativity and working and productive behaviors in a lot of ways, parenting, work. So, and that's a big, again, big period of time that's for many of us really kind of prescribed. We're doing this, and this, and then we hit this retirement point, which is, this is most challenging, and I think sort of, in a good kind of way, because it's not that we haven't been driving our lives this whole rest of the time, but I think we have a lot more freedom to define it in here. And so I think that's part of the challenge is, wow, it's sort of wide open and you have a whole lot of choices. And I know with a group of professors and faculty, I know, I don't know if you have this experience. I certainly do. In points when I've been so busy, and suddenly I have a moment of free time I didn't anticipate. Sometimes I don't know what to do with that. It's almost overwhelming. Like, wow, I didn't see that coming, and I have been busy. It's like, and it's an interesting space that usually I can pivot and work with it, but I just think it's important, and that I think is sort of the task at hand, is figuring out how will you populate that space. And just this slide is sort of based on both Erik Erikson's work and also George Vaillant's work. And I don't know if folks are familiar with George Vaillant. He did some really interesting work, longitudinal studies of adult development. They're really curious and interesting, limited in some ways, but I think, really interesting stuff. And he wrote the book Aging Well, which is in the references. And he followed a group of Harvard male undergraduates through pretty much their whole lives. He and his team, I don't know how long he lived. But followed them through their whole lives and just kind of took data on things about their health, their well-being, their career choices, a variety of different things, and kind of studied what factors contributed to things going well and what didn't. And I think his second little group, he added in a second group of kind of non-student males, or just guys from that general part of the country. And then I think the third set that he sort of considered, after probably with some criticism from women, was like, oh, I should actually look at women because occasionally they're different from men. So, and so it's an interesting little read about, adult development, things like that. But, he follows along with Erik Erikson's stuff, and I think Erikson had, as many of you probably know, he had, like an 8-phase thing of human development from, birth till death, basically. And each phase is defined by a certain conflict. And there are certain issues that we, start at certain points in life and revisit. And so, looking here, like identity, like for Erikson's identity versus identity diffusion, and so depending on how you resolve the conflict at one phase kind of determines how you move into the next. And, and some of us, it's not always as linear. We gals aren't apparently quite as linear as the guys, and it's a variety of things that we don't have time for this afternoon, but are very interesting if anyone wants to have those conversations at another time. So identity is a curious one. We start that sort of understanding who we are when we're teenagers. Typically, I am not my parents. I am different from these people. I'm looking to my peers for some kind of reflection and understanding, and I'm looking at the larger world and trying to figure out who I am in a variety of areas. And then, I think we, at certain points in life, we come back to that over and over. I think at this phase, when we're looking at retirement, this is a real important phase to look at this question, because I do, and I will visit this a little bit later as well. Because again, who am I? Back to Nancy Schlossberg, and that intimacy and intimacy development, that goes, it's kind of typically young adulthood start, but it gets into, who am I in relationship? How does relationship, impact my development, my understanding of the world? And again, I think that's a question we want to look at again here. My relationship, what are our norms and values and routines? Do we need to shift some of that up at this point? Where are we at as adults at this point? The career stuff is obviously stuff we do, early and midlife, if we're just pulling it together in terms of our pursuits and our vocations and things like that. Making sense of our professional and productive role in the world. Generativity, the giving back thing, both that comes in parenting and teaching and mentoring, and just kind of bringing up the next generation, passing along your wisdom to others. An important piece, and one again that we do a lot, from early adulthood, probably all the way through our lives. Valiant came up with this phrase, the keeper of the meaning, which I thought was sort of cool. And this gets into kind of later midlife, probably, as we're getting towards, probably a little bit past retirement, frankly. But I think the more mature adults are the ones we look to maintain the traditions. People talk about, my grandmother was the hub of the family. We all went to her place for the holidays or whatever. And she always did this or that routine. And we kind of keep the traditions and routines and just ways of doing things, both for ourselves, for our families, and even for our larger community. So I think it's sort of an interesting phase and kind of curious adult responsibility. And then finally, we're so dramatically the integrity versus despair of Erickson. He talks about, and this is certainly later life when we're sort of just reflecting on what we've done and how it's gone. We take stock, and we do that at various points in our lives. We do, how am I doing? How do I want to go forward from here? So, looking back, and hopefully we have satisfaction in the choices we've made, the contributions we've made, our mark in the world, and, can then according to Erickson, that helps us sort of manage aging more gracefully, I guess. So it's good. But all right, and there it is, aging gracefully. This slide always makes me laugh. This is one of Jim's. Successful aging is contingent upon avoiding disease and disability. I hope you all knew that before you came to this class. But just in case, that is an important one. I think, I think we've all been rather cognizant of those issues, certainly of late, but the disease part anyway. But staying active both cognitively and physically. I was joking with this morning's group that, I think of old as older than however old I am right now. And so that number keeps going up. It's getting to be pretty old. But I do think staying active, and some of them, I don't know what you all do, but I have to play the Wordle game every morning to maintain my cognitive functioning. A few other little word games and puzzles to keep me going. We do a lot more physical stuff. We're much more active. I do really feel it's not just my bias, and part of it is my bias, but I think I remember being a younger person and I thought that people at my age were like seriously old, and maybe young people think I'm seriously old, but it doesn't feel as seriously old as I thought it would feel now that I'm here. So I hope that is true for you as well. I think staying engaged with life, keeping up our relationships, and staying productive. And I imagine, for many of us, productivity is an important thing, achieving things, accomplishing goals. It's going to be different, but I think it's going to be useful. Where are we at? I'm paying attention to time. Life begins at retirement. I like that picture. Oh yeah, from George Valiant. Whoops, no surprises on this stuff, but I would say that 7 things, and subsequent research has really borne some of this out with a little more science behind it, but obviously not being a smoker or giving that up early. Having an adaptive coping style. Man, if you weren't adaptive 2 years ago, you probably are now, because you had to be. I think, being able to kind of be more flexible, more cognitively open to different ideas really does help us. And, for those of us who don't change as easily, that's a good thing to work on for sure. The absence of alcohol abuse, I think Ben Franklin, all things in moderation. It's that one glass of red wine is still considered to be okay. I know that's controversial, but keeping a healthy weight, which typically goes more to exercise and diet stuff. And I think as we age, the metabolism equation keeps shifting a bit. But so being mindful of that and staying on top of that. But I think if you're physically active and doing reasonably well, that will come naturally. That exercise is there at number 6. Stable marriage, or close connections, good friends. I think being in some kind of relationship with somebody else, it pulls us out of ourselves. It gives us another person to bounce things off of, to pay attention to check on us. And all those things really help us to stay on point, and, take care of ourselves, hopefully. And being concerned and available and interested in other people, I think is an important bit with that. And, I'll just note that years of education is on this list, and I can't help myself. I always have to make a kind of comment about that. I feel like that's sort of a spurious finding, frankly. I think education is associated with other advantages that probably are, yeah. Thank you, Julianne, for putting in the Wordle link. I appreciate that. I think if you're better educated, you probably also have, better access to healthcare. You probably have a variety of things. Valiant postulated that if you were more educated, somehow you understood more about how better ways of taking care of yourself. Yeah, maybe. I think that's probably true. I think there's probably other things that go with that also. So feel free to jump in and correct me if you disagree. Let me set this time up as a point for maybe us to take like 5 minutes here. Does that make sense? Take 5 quick minutes and then we'll kind of jump in for the last part. Is that okay?
You want to do 155, Carol?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'll pause the recording.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to bump through these couple of pages because I know you all have access to the slides, but just really quickly, this is, again, one of Jim's funny things. It's called the Retirement Attitude Assessment. And I had to put it's sort of, it's a 10-item thing. I have 5 items on this page and 5 on the next because I couldn't figure out how to combine them in a way that you could read them. But basically, it's very face valid. Over on the left, it's, it's a whole bunch of positive statements about retirement. On the right, a whole bunch of kind of negative statements. And it asks you to kind of pick a number from 1 on the right to 10 on the left, with 1 being most negative and 10 being most positive. Kind of where do you fit on that between those 2 poles? And so I'll let you kind of scan through this one quickly, and then I'll go to the next one. Sorry, didn't really let you scan quickly, did I? Scan through quickly. Again, this is sort of, extreme statements on either side. And the person who would complete this would go through and, circle the number, just go quickly and circle the number that kind of corresponds to, what your attitude is about these different things. I intend to expand my sense of humor. You're 9 on that or something like that. And then another page of these kinds of things. And, it's definitely what we would probably call a quick and dirty, very dirty kind of tool to just get a kind of quick read on your kind of where you're at with all of this right now. And according to Jim, if you were 80 or above on this, so 10 is the highest score you can get on each item, and there are 10 items, the highest score you get is 100. So if you're 80 or above, you're great. You can retire today. You'll be sailing off into the sunset in a very happy way. Most of us probably typically, if we're really looking at this thoughtfully, we probably fall between about 50 and 80. We're enthusiastic, we're hopeful, but we have some fears and concerns, very natural and normal. But I think we're probably still good to go in that way. He says if you're 50 or below, you're probably having some conflict around this, and maybe you need to look at that. One issue there's a few issues, but we do get a lot of stuff at work, and I think, sometimes the reality of like, well, what will I be letting go of, and how do I feel about that, is hard, and that's different for all of us, but good to think about. And by all means, have some fun with that at your leisure. I do want to ask, and again, we can do this either by people shouting on, muting, and talking, or feel free to type in the chat. But I think, as we start to think about constructing this life beyond retirement, we got to look at, what are some of the special important things I've gotten at work. So let's do share. And also the question below, where else and how else can I get some of those things? But the important thing, what are some of the special things I got at work? Some people say paycheck. But let's see what folks are saying. Okay, yeah, structure, companionship, people. Yep. Yeah, we spend more time at work typically than at home. Typically, yeah. This last little bit's been a little strange with that, but there are people we see at work and we have really good intimate connections with in the workplace that we only see at work and through our work. So that's a big deal. Yeah, feeling like you're making a difference. Yeah, exactly. That purpose, you're doing something. I like that. I get paid to play. That's great. Yeah, exactly. You get to do what you love, solving puzzles and problems, keeping yourself active. Yep, your identity. Yep. Intellectual engagement, new knowledge. Yeah, someone this morning said, you have people at work understand everything. You can say things very quickly and they know what you mean. Whereas the people outside of your work situation, you have to really give a long preamble to tell a story. So just, that connection and ease of communication around certain things. Yeah, intellectual engagement, new knowledge. Yeah, interacting with the students. Yes. Right. Yeah, keeps you fresh, keeps you on your toes. Yep, belonging, being in a tribe. Yep. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So a lot of really important things. And yeah, that's good. The sense of adventure. Yeah. Yeah, students and colleagues. And students keep us young, man. They ask questions we didn't even anticipate ever answering. Yeah, they do seem to get younger. Yes, when we go do the resident orientation. It's like Doogie Howser. But yeah. Right. Building something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really being part of something, working, pulling together in some direction. Yeah. Yeah, we get a lot. Definitely do. And I think the second question here, where else and how else can we get those things now or in the future? I think, we don't have to answer that right here, but I think it's an important question that we have to sort of, as we look ahead, like we're going to need those things, or analogs of those things. Hey, Patty, to your house. All right. But yeah, but yeah, I think there's a lot happening with this that we have to really consider and figure out. And so, again, we don't have to answer all the questions today, but I think starting to ponder some of that stuff is real important. All right, love this slide. Retire from work, but not from life. So a lot of ways to do this. All right, well, back to Nancy Schlossberg. I really like her kind of conceptualization of some of those areas of focus we really need to have, and you've all touched on these things. So no real surprises, I imagine, but she really talks about this whole idea of having to have a psychological portfolio for retirement, maybe just for life in general, but definitely for retirement. And she talks about these three major areas that we really need to put some energy into figuring out. And one really big one is this issue of identity, how we define ourselves. And so many of us define ourselves based on what we do. We have our personality, our views of the world, our perspectives in general. But that who are you kind of thing, and who are you now, as a retired person. So figuring that piece out. I mean, granted, we're, hopefully multidimensional humans, but work has been a big featured part. So I think that's an important bit. The social piece is huge, the relationships. We do spend a ton of time at work, and we've got to figure out, what will my social world be now, in that. And, hopefully we've been cultivating that in a variety of areas in our lives. So it's not like, wow, I have no one to deal with now that I stopped working, but in my job. And then I think this last one, this is a big issue as well right now, is this issue of purpose and meaning. Why do I get out of bed in the morning? What is my reason for being here? And finding that. And many of us have worked in very compelling kinds of work for a long time. And so how do we keep up that sense of having a purpose? Because that's important. We still need to have goals and things that we're working towards. And so all these need to be present in whatever this next phase is. So yes. Yeah. Thank you, Julianne. Julianne's doing a nice job of putting some stuff into the chat for people to look at. Yeah. Schlossberg's little books too are great. They're short and sweet, but she kind of takes you to some of her stuff. So she gives some ideas about, how to kind of get this going on. So revitalizing, you're still going to be you, okay? But kind of, you in the next phase, in the next chapter. So she gives some interesting advice. And one is this constructive personal narrative. And again, I always want to clarify the meaning of these things. It's not run off and write your memoirs. Although, again, if you're inclined in that way, by all means, I will not stop you. But really, it's more looking, from narrative psychology, we think of our lives in chapters and phases. And so, one way to sort of figure out the next chapter is to look at threads that have been consistent through the story. And so if you're always a person who likes, has curiosity about other people, or who likes to be outside, or who, really values science, or, whatever it is, certain things, are going to be these threads that we can pull on and sort of connect into the next phase. Okay, so what's that going to look like in this chapter? So I think that's sort of more of the idea, is look at your life as sort of the larger story. And again, your chapters can be discrete and they don't necessarily have to connect up. It could be a series of short stories, but if you're struggling with the next piece, I think it is good to look at some of the threads that have been present throughout the earlier parts. This idea of searching for a spiritual home, again, you don't have to rush off to a religious situation. For those of you who do have, religious affiliation, I think that's great. And, that can certainly provide community and connection and, a greater sense of understanding one's place in the world. For folks who, are less adherent to any traditional religious stuff. But, I think spirituality is a very personal question. And one I know personally, I think we tend to visit over and over in life at different points and in different situations. And so, just understanding your space in the world, and, what is the meaning of all this? What am I doing here? How do I fit into everything? Answering some of those questions and looking at that. Modify your ambition. That's an advice piece I know that comes out of her specific work with. She did some specific work with high-level executives, hard driving, CEO types, and she found sometimes, they join into some board of directors for some community organization and just take over. Very intense, and that kind of intensity didn't translate always real well into sort of the out of the C-suite. And so, recognizing that one doesn't necessarily need that intensity at times, although, again, or finding ways to channel that where it's really useful and helpful. So I think there are a few ways to approach that issue. You don't have to become less ambitious per se. It's just kind of how you approach that and channel that. The practicing of resilience is good for all of us all the time. I think, resilience, as we know, is our ability to bounce back from adversity and hopefully get to some semblance of baseline. That's always questionable. And I know it's an area that's been taxed a lot lately. We all just need to work real hard at building robust coping strategies, cultivating things like self-compassion and gratitude and some of the things that really help us stay steady in moments and keep our attitude positive. And then all the basic stuff of, just basic self-care, good food, good sleep, good exercise, that kind of stuff, all from every level of probably Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to approach this. And so it's important. The truth is, as we've learned over and over, and certainly got a crash course of late, if we miss the early ones, is, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how it's going to be. And we have to be able to figure out a way to be all right regardless. So that is a challenge at hand, I think, right now. Take initiative and take control. The world is not necessarily going to land at your doorstep and knock and invite you out. So you have to kind of be assertive at points and maybe push yourself out the door in moments to do that. What do I want to do? Well, I can't wait for someone to help me do that thing. I have to go figure out how to do that. And then, as always, play to your strengths. By all means, reinvent yourself, but, use some of the skills and strengths you already have, because that will make it a little bit easier. And probably those are things you like to do because you've done them enough to be good at them. So think about that. The relationship piece is a very interesting one. There's the making of new connections. Many people talk to me about moving. I'll jump around this slide a bit, but I've had a number of people say, "Oh, well, I retire, I'm going to move to whatever, some less expensive environment, whatever that is, or another country, or this kind of thing," which is great and exciting. And I think if you're bold enough to do that, hopefully you're moving to be near other people that you like and get along with, and or you have a certain amount of enthusiasm or have spent time in that new place that you really want to be there, and there's some things that are compelling to you. I think it's nice to, Nancy Schlossberg recommends this issue of identifying your connectors, that person who knows everybody. And we all know a person like that who just is, Mr. or Ms. Social, and they kind of know a whole bunch of folks. And, if you ever need to find a handy person or a referral for this or a reference for that, they can at least point you in the right direction. They're good with that. And so, if you're struggling to find that, like, oh, gosh, I want to do this or that, those are people that can sidle up to a little bit. And then, of course, if you want to be in a book group or start an art thing with folks, get a whole bunch of people to ride bikes or whatever it is, like, stimulating that and getting that going. Try to reach out to your friends, elbow them a little bit if you haven't done some of those things in a while, and see if they want to join you on some of this, and see if you can get something started. I think that's important. And connection is important. One thing I try to say to groups now for sure, but we are social creatures, and even the introverts among us are social. We do need other people, and social support, positive social support, doesn't have to be a gigantic array of friends or family, but one or two people that you can count on to have your back is a huge variable, one of the most important and most consistently cited variables in resilience and well-being. So if you only have energy to put into one thing, I recommend trying to put it into your social world. Hopefully you have energy for more than one thing, but it's really important. And then, of course, you're in relationships already. And so this gets back to those conversations you have with people. I think we want to talk to if you have a spouse or a partner or somebody who's in your world that you're around a lot, you want to talk to them about stuff like, wow, this is going to be different. again, one of the times couples come to therapy is when that second person retires and they're trying to renegotiate them like, wait a minute, like I didn't think I would have to deal with you on Tuesday mornings, and here you are. So, just figuring that stuff out and sorting out. And then we all have different needs for time alone and different needs for time with other people. So just having the conversations, making time for family and friends. Again, I think that's always a good thing, and being more intentional about that. I've certainly learned a bit about that in recent times. I'm kind of a technical dinosaur, so y'all might be way far ahead on this stuff than I am. But the internet, I learned about Meetup teaching this class years back, and I'm sure there's other social ways to connect. But Meetup, as people have told me, is this wonderful way to find people who want to do what you want to do. If I want to go paddleboarding and I can't find anyone to go with me, I could conceivably look on the Meetup thing and see if there's anyone who wants to go. And so I always joke, and thank you, Julie, I'll put the link in the chat. Good. Wait, I have found that I hear, as a psychologist, I hear all these really gnarly online dating stories, some really funny online dating stories, but some not so funny ones. And some, it's one, again, I wouldn't say don't do online dating. It's fine. And people do it all the time, apparently. But I guess by way of comparison, like the Meetup stories, the worst I've ever heard, and again, this is Carol's anecdotal evidence here, but the worst I've ever heard was, I wasn't really enjoying that particular outing. Like I went to the Meetup for, playing board games or whatever, and those people are all right, but I didn't really click with anyone too much, and I don't know that I'll go back. Okay. So you've lost maybe a little bit of time, but if you want to go bird watching, you want to play tennis, whatever it is you want to do, hiking is a big one. A lot of people do dog walking meetups, and I just thought that it sounds like pretty much anything you'd want to do that would involve other people, you can find other people to do that with you. So it's both a way to just get some traction around an activity, but also to meet some people. I think we really need to look at this issue of loneliness. Is really been a tricky one. And loneliness and isolation have been, again, those are issues, as we go through life. They've definitely been really big issues of late, because people are more isolated for safety purposes, and that's just been really, really hard, I think, and it's harder both for teenagers and for those of us as we age. I think that gets really tricky. And so I think finding ways to just stay connected and have those, other people in life is a really key way to manage stress and to just feel better and safer and like you're part of. So finally, let's talk about purpose. A lot of ways to channel your time, and you'll get to decide. A little bit about your passion and your focus or areas of focus. It doesn't have to be just one. Creativity is the one, I think one of the areas where for most of us in retirement is one of the places that really expands a lot, because many of us, the creative things, the arts and crafts, cooking, photography, whatever it is you do to be a creative person, playing music, a lot of it is after hours. Now, I always have like a professor. I did have a professor. Like, I'm an art professor, a music person. So for some of you, this may actually be your work, so which is great. So you can still expand your creativity even further when you retire. But it does seem like the area that we do really jump into, many of us at this point. Learning is a great one. I did get a great email from the person who runs the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute after this morning's talk, just to remind me about that. It's a wonderful series that she sent me their catalog of very cool classes, a really diverse set of things that you can kind of dabble in and learn about. That's really, really interesting. So I encourage us, again, it's, keep it going, keep your mind active. Again, you have for years. So, I would expect no less at this point. Many people keep working. I have had, especially faculty, approach me after this talk and be like, I don't actually want to retire. I'm like, well, you don't have to. I don't think anyone's going to make you go. But it's, many of us want to stay productive in sort of the work modeled kind of way. And there's a lot of ways back. So I definitely encourage people to look at that. Volunteering, similarly, I think that's a great way to put, use your time. A lot of folks are doing the, taking care of grandkids or, other, elders, other people, and doing a little bit more of that. Again, you want to be, communicate well and be clear on the expectations with that. Sometimes people see your retirement is like, great, I just got the free childcare is coming in. It's like, well, hold up a second. You may want to do some of that if that's a way your life is structured. You may want to do not all of your time doing that. So, be thoughtful and let yourself, speak your truth around those things. And of course, leisure and play, which I think is always an exciting thing to think about. Just a little every day is Saturday, right? I won't spend too much time on this slide. This is Nancy Schlossberg talks a lot about these different paths. She tried to define these different paths that people went on, and some get to sort of kind of staying on your same course, using your same skills. Some is just being kind of open to new experiences, standing on the sidelines, or even just retreating. I don't think we necessarily land in one of these places and stay there. I have a sense, actually, you have to read more of her stuff, but I think at different points in retirement, maybe even in life, I think we might jump around. I could imagine, initially say taking some time out, just like I'm just going to hang out and, not worry about too much. And then maybe I'm going to enjoy my unscheduled time and see what happens. And then who knows, stuff is going to start to populate the calendar. Then, so I can imagine going through these phases and being on any of these paths at a given point in time. So it's interesting. And then just getting back to George Vaillant's set of general recommendations about retirement. He really featured the social thing. He recognized the importance of the social world at work, and that we have to recreate that somewhere. Sometimes we have to learn how to play again. Hopefully that's not true for you. And but play is good. It helps us take ourselves a little less seriously, and it can just add some fun and silliness. So hopefully that's part of our lives already. Being creative, again, that theme always comes up, and we have more time and resources for it. So I think that's actually pretty great. And we can grow and improve and develop along that, while we're aging. And then the lifelong learning thing. I think that's, stay active, learn stuff. I think that keeps us curious and involved. And yeah. All right. Love my Will Rogers quote here. Half our life is spent trying to find something to do with the time we rush through life trying to save. So appreciate that reality. All right. I'm going to tell you a story. When I started at the University of Davis, worked there 10 years, left to do private practice, and rejoined up in 2008 at the Med Center. So interesting trajectory with that. And shortly after coming back to UC Davis in 2008, a fellow showed up at ASAP for an appointment, and he's a middle manager, and he'd been there, some 35 plus years, and he says, Carol, I've set my retirement date twice now, and each time I got right up to it, and I kind of freaked out, and I couldn't go forward. So I pulled the plug, and I retreated and back to work. He says, I've set my retirement date a third time, and I'm reading this book, and I really think this book is going to be helpful to me. It's up there at the top. I have no financial interest in this book, but it is a good book. He says, and I'm working on something in there that's really helping me. So I'm hopeful I'm going to this is the third time's the charm, So he said, but I'd like to have a handful of sessions, just kind of process some of this to just be sure I'm on track, I'm not missing anything. And so he was great. And he and the book is Ernie Zielinski, who wrote How to Retire Happy, Wild, and Free. And if you go onto Amazon or you Google him, Ernie's obviously spent his retirement writing retirement books. So good for him. It's a funny little book, but it's one that I've shared with a number of different people. And one of the things that impresses me, it's always interesting when people who are rather different, when universally they're like, this is actually a pretty helpful book, because you're like, huh, who would have known that? I always think that sometimes these people like it, these people won't. But anyway, it's in your references. And if I were more technically advanced, the options for retirement would be sort of the center of your piece of paper, and all these things would kind of spoke off in some grand wheel type way. Things I can maybe get good at when I have an opportunity to retire and get some technical skills. But Ernie, kind of a throwback to the 70s, he has this activities that turn me on now, activities that turn me on in the past, new activities I've thought about doing, and then just random stuff that maybe people have suggested or what have you. And basically, what this guy told me, he explained, he says, so, I got this book, and I put up, single guys, I put up this sheets of like newsprint in his house, and he started doing this task, and it was fantastic. He and oftentimes when I'm with groups, I ask them like, let's spend a few minutes doing this. I want to be thoughtful about time and not take your whole Friday afternoon with this. But something I do recommend you considering with this, is sitting down and sort of being more concrete. Because what the guy said to me is, each of the 2 times prior when he'd set his retirement date, he said, it felt like I was running up to the edge of a cliff, and it was really foggy. And I'm supposed to jump off this cliff into the fog, and I don't know what's there. And so he said that, so as he started doing this particular task, he said it was like the fog was receding, and he was able to see beyond that place. And so he said, well, I want to learn how to play the guitar. So he got that in there. Really want to go to France. I always thought that was cool. I should probably learn French. Maybe I take a class in French. And then I want to take a motorcycle trip with my brother. And I want to get a dog. And I want to, and this whole set of things he started to list out. He says, so, I filled up like 2 or 3 like sheets of newsprint with these different things I was going to do, big things, small things. He said, and I really start to feel better and better and better. And the truth is, and the happy heending of this story is, the guy did, in fact, the third time was the charm. He retired, and which was great. And heard through the grapevine that he was actually having a rather good retirement. So I was really happy to hear that and know that. And it was really cool that he kind of let me in on the process, because I felt like it was really useful to me. And I've added it into this talk as a result, because I thought, wow, this is a person who really kind of lived the dream and had the conflict around it all. Really nice, thoughtful person. And again, I do, the recommendation's a good one. So, I don't know if, I probably do have a minute here for this. Anyone, if you feel like sharing in the chat, do you have certain things you're going to spend some time doing when you retire, certain stuff you've kind of got dialed in for yourself here? Anyone want to share? I know some people talked about, they said, what will you gain? Some people said like time for travel and things like that. Certain activities you want to really kind of drill into a bit more when you're retired? Oh, I know you want to do something. Here we go. Cycling across the United States, right on. Huh. Learning Italian. You got to go to Italy too. That will be key. The banjo, farming, flower bombing, my friends. Ooh, okay. Flower bomb me. Want to sign up for that one. Sewing, cycling, work for my wife. Good. Yes. You're going to fly. Oh, that's great. I was riding my bike the other day, and someone was landing there at the airport. It was like right over my head. I was pretty impressed. There you go. Finish some long-term projects my real job doesn't allow sufficient time for. Terrific. Yeah. I really would encourage people to start thinking, I know it sounds, hopelessly concrete, but I do actually think that's helpful. I mean, we have a sense of, I want to have fun, I want to be relaxed, um, but I really like, what will you do? So, and try to visualize that a little bit, because I think that helps really to fill in or even identify the gaps of like, wow, I haven't really thought about this or this. I could fill a little time here and there, but what's the bigger thing going to look like? Um, yeah. Well, I would encourage you to play around with this and, even kind of do that. I have been impressed. I mean, some people give you, you set them loose for 5 minutes and they have a list of like 14 things, they're sure to do. And as it gets closer, I think we have a better idea of it. But yeah. Well, all right. And it is an interesting little read, I'm sure. It's been a while since I've read this book, but I do recommend it. Well, just a few sort of, thoughts. There are a million retirement plans. I'm going to share three of them, three sort of generic ones, but I think there's many, many ways, many permutations that you could pull together for your own personal path here. The pure leisure one that's it. Every day is Saturday. I'm just doing fun things that I want to do. And I would absolutely, pick some things that keep your mind, occupied, that feel rewarding, that make you feel good, get you around other people, allow you to be creative, that sort of stuff. That's a perfectly great plan. And if that's your plan, I applaud it. One of the more popular plans of late, kind of a I think it's sort of curious. I see a lot, and I don't know if you notice this in your worlds, but I see a lot of people, the med center, who retired, and then suddenly you see them, 6 months later, they're back, and to a person, everyone looks like 10 years younger at that point. That's a sort of magical. So I'm interested in how that all comes together. But I think part of it is because they're less stressed. They've had some time away. They've actually chosen to do this, don't necessarily have to, but they've come back and I think feel really valued because someone said, hey, we want you back because you have some information that we can still kind of need over here. And yet they don't feel quite depressed because you're not working full time, which is great. And, I think, it's a little less of that. It's an interesting one. But a lot of people do it just to have a little extra income and do that kind of thing. And as you look over these plans, it's a set of possible rewards that can come with this particular plan. And the more you check off, probably the better you would like this particular plan. And so, for practical things, you have more money, insurance, possibly, ego satisfaction, feeling like you matter and you have a purpose. It gives you a routine and schedule. A lot of us like routine and schedule rather than having to think like, what am I going to do today? Helps us see the difference between leisure and non-leisure more clearly. We don't have as much downtime. I don't know how I feel about that right now. Sometimes they can help, work-life balance kind of stuff. Gives us something special that we go out and do, and we bring something back to our home. Gives us the social stuff, the purpose. Can really be therapeutic. I would say, many people work because they need to, but if you can, working shouldn't necessarily just be something to fill the time or to earn the extra money, but should be something, do something you actually sort of like doing and gives you rewards, both tangible and otherwise. I think, the third popular option here is the leisure and volunteer, and volunteering. And again, we can combine all of these things. You can volunteer and work and be leisurely. So again, hence the many combinations of possibilities. Volunteering is really cool because a lot of us, especially when you have a really demanding job, it can be hard to put energy into causes and organizations as much as you'd like in terms of supporting them. And in retirement, you might have more options to really participate, roll up your sleeves, get a little closer in. And I think that's kind of a cool thing. And it, of course, gives us a social world, gives us some sense of, being recognized, acknowledged for contributing. I think with volunteer work, we feel a little freer to say, "Ooh, this may or may not be working." Don't feel quite as onerous in terms of a job in that way. Gives you the purpose, keeps you active, mentally. It's a nice substitute for working and typically you're around like-minded people. Some folks who see, have similar values and understanding. So that could be really cool. And socially, you can learn some new stuff. Yeah, deepens the leisure time and the whole give back thing, which is, I think, important to many of us. If, now we have some time to contribute some skills and some wisdom and to be able to do that, I think it's great. So, a few final thoughts about kind of approaching retirement. I think it's never too early to really think about this. It's funny, as I observe my own trajectory on this, and I'll just share it's, for a long time, this has felt very, very far away. And so I talk to folks about all this, but it's like, it doesn't, it's out here. And so more recently, it feels a little bit closer in, and it's a different feeling as I share some of this now, just for better or worse. I think it's important to, if we do have some negative thoughts, some fears, anxieties, about retiring and this change in our life at that point, I think it's really important to look at that and try to figure out what some of the barriers are for ourselves and see if there's ways we can kind of construct this next phase or time it in a way that feels like it really honors, those concerns and accounts for those. If I need to feel like I'm contributing after I retire, I got to start planning about that and think about it in certain ways and start to, come up with some real concrete ideas about how I'll do that. I think when we do start to make those plans, it starts making work feel a little bit, easier and lighter, which is kind of cool in an interesting way. As more of that starts to materialize in your mind, I think it can help make the day-to-day a little bit easier, and I think, it'll probably be a few years for me yet, still trying to figure out the particulars, but what's interesting is, it won't be a decade. So I'm kind of like, like when people talk about, oh, this is a long range plan for this, that, or the other, I'm like, all right, well, good luck with that. So it feels a little freeing in some regards, even though you're interested and curious and can even contribute some helpful thoughts. It's like, well, and you don't feel quite the burden of some things. Don't be afraid to be enthusiastic about it, as it gets closer. For any of you who are retiring this year, I think go with that. Jim, my predecessor, joked about, starting, he was former military, he says, oh, I'm going to wear a Hawaiian shirt to work. I'm like, whoa. Who are you? But I think those kinds of things and kind of start to try this on. I laugh at that particular new image one because I don't know about you. I've been sitting in this chair for 2 years, yoga pants and barefoot now. So I think I'm communicating my new image, although you know that. You wouldn't have known had I not told you. But again, play around with people, be mysterious about your plans, as Jim always says, invite me to lunch and I'll tell you all about it. So I think that's a good one. I love these pieces of advice. This dissipate hidden resentments and restore broken relationships. I added in that do your best to leave them behind. I do not believe at the point of retirement that anyone has to run around the university mending fences with folks that have been challenging for them. If you're inclined and that's important to you, I wouldn't, tell you not to do it, but I really think that the key is not carrying it with you into your retirement. I often joke when I give talks that I have a running list of things I'm not going to miss. And so, which is actually incredibly helpful to me because I add to it all the time, especially on the hard days. You're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to miss that, and I love that it's not written down at this point. It would be many pages, I think, but I think there are many things I will miss, by the way. But having that list of things you won't miss is sort of helpful, and maybe something I sort of have to remind myself, of like when I do get closer up of how that's going to feel and that. So. But yeah, there are some situations and processes and experiences that I'm sure most of us will happily leave behind. And that's really the thing. Don't carry it with you as an annoyance into your retirement. You get to leave. So that's the good thing. I would say try not to take things too seriously as you approach retirement. I don't think anybody, certainly not in the faculty version of things, is at any risk of just casting off all responsibilities and lowering their standards. In fact, I think people tend to often kind of move in a little more closely to finish things off well in the way you want to, and I hope you will. And then just a final couple of comments about farewell arrangements and festivities. I do think I always want to remind people, because folks have strong feelings about this, and they're like, oh, not everyone's like this, but it's set of people. I've known people, that I worked with for a long time, and suddenly you haven't seen them around for a while. It's pre-COVID. And then, you say, whatever happened to so-and-so? I haven't seen, they're like, oh, he retired. You're like, when? There's no conversation, no nothing. You just slipped out, when no one was looking. You get to do that. Obviously, we all get to make the decision about what we want to do. I'll just note that one thing I've really appreciated over the years is being able to stop and attend someone's retirement party and having a moment, an opportunity to say to that person, like, it really meant a lot to work with you, and you've changed my life in these ways, and I am better for that. That's really, really important. As I joked this morning, I often bring them the Ernie Zielinski book with a little nice set of comments in there. But we don't, so often, I try very hard to do this more, especially lately, but to stop and acknowledge the way people impact us positively. And I think we all could do that a lot. But I think, something like a retirement, observation, some kind of party or gathering about that gives people an opportunity to do that. And so don't deprive them of that or yourself, actually. I realize it's awkward to be, in the spotlight sometimes, but, I think, so I won't harp on this point forever, but I just think it's a nice thing to consider doing, because there are people who probably do want to come and honor you in some ways. You'd be surprised. So, and it's also fun. So really, that's kind of all I got for this afternoon. I thank you all for participating and let me yammering on for this long. I'm going to stop now. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to hang out and answer those. I know the provost is going to hop on in a sec. And then I'll also just say, if anyone would also rather, come and have a chat, privately about any of this, let me know. I will have to work something out. So, but thank you. And yeah, I'll sit and wait and see if anyone has anything they want to say or ask.
So Carol, great. Thanks for doing this once again for us. Every time I listen to this is the second one of the day, I learned something new because I've got a 5-year plan. So it's really helpful, and I really do appreciate it. So, and I think Kyle wanted to say a few words too, and we're going to move on.
Yeah, well, Carol, thank you. And this, for those of you that don't know, this is her second session of the day, and both were awesome. And we really appreciate your time spent with us on an annual basis. And we hope to have you back next year if you'll allow us. And thank you again for contributing to this program, because it's important for folks to think more than just the dollars and cents in retirement, and you shed a very strong light on that. So we appreciate your time, and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for having me, and wish you guys all the best and have a great weekend. So,
thanks, you too. All right. Well, thank you all for hanging with us today. It is going to be my pleasure now to introduce Vice Provost Phil Kass. As we promised in the first session, Vice Provost Kass is going to come back and give a little presentation today on some very important information for all of you. So if you do, but invite Brad Horton also to share Phil's slides, and we'll get it going from there. Welcome, Vice Provost Kass.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. And Kyle, thanks so much for everything that you've done to make this possible, and Julianne and Brad as well. It's interesting because I just jumped in and I see so many names up at the top of my screen that I recognize. It's kind of scary, actually. Uh, honest with you, including my, former mentor and boss, Ralph Hexter. Hey, Ralph. So I'll just go ahead and jump in, and I think Brad will share his screen. Thanks, Brad. And I'll just ask Brad to go ahead and advance the slides when we're ready. So I'm going to try today to go over quickly some of these main topics. And then I'm happy to answer questions, although thank goodness Kyle's here as well, because he's much more of an expert at this stuff than I am. And happy just to have any type of dialogue. I realize it's Friday afternoon, close to 3 o'clock, and I don't want to keep you any longer than necessary. But this would be a good chance, I think, to just pose questions, have a fairly loose discussion. I think many of us all know each other by now anyway, and so we can go ahead and do it. So the first thing I think I want to try to cover are some of the basic rules for recall, because it's important to be mindful that we have to be compliant with some of the legal issues related to this. We'll talk about some of the compensated activities that exist in retirement. And even though I'm used to really talking to Senate faculty, what I want to also do is address some of the people who are non-Senate academics as well. And then finally, finish up by remaining engaged through other kinds of activities that exist, which I think are particularly interesting. And we're fortunate, at UC Davis to have the Center for Professional Education, AKA, or what used to be called University Extension, in which there are really interesting ways of, I think, remaining intellectually stimulated and engaged. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. All right, Brad, if we could have the next slide, please. Okay, now, timing is critical when it comes to talking about whether or not you want to be recalled to work at UC Davis. Now, these rules are not ones that we've established at UC Davis. There are ones that the IRS has actually created, and that's why it's so important to abide by them. And by abiding by them, we're not only protecting the university, but we're also protecting ourselves as well and protecting your rights. So if you're a member of UCRP and you have not reached normal retirement age, which I've listed below, you can't actually have recall discussions until there's been an actual break in service, which is typically when you've received your first UCRP monthly retirement payment, or 30 days later, although we're told that it's preferably 90 days, but I think most people at least do 30. So what does this mean when we talk about normal retirement age? So if you're in a cohort, like mine, and I'm not going to call names out or anything, but if you're here, you probably joined UCRP before July 1st, 2013, which means that age 60 would be considered a normal retirement age. If you've joined UCRP after July 1st, 2013, then it becomes age 65. So what that means is if you're like somebody like me who joined before July 1st, 2013, I could talk to, let's say, a department chair or a dean about a recall. Now, people can talk about, whatever it is they want with respect to, oh, wouldn't it be great to retire then, or something like that. But so this is really specifically about discussions with recall. And so I would just ask that you read these rules and abide by them. Again, for your protection as well as for the universities. Okay. And if you have any specific questions about this, you'd be like me and pose them to Kyle, who's helped me understand them a whole lot better. Now, more IRS rules. If somebody is actually recalled, you cannot be recalled from retirement at more than 43% time. And I don't know how they came up with 43%, but it is what it is. And so you can't be recalled more than 43% in any given month. And when I do see these requests for approval, it's interesting that a lot of requests hit that 43%, but they never hit it any higher. And it has to be 43% overall in any particular month. So you can't be like 43% in one college and 20% in another or anything like that. The total has to not exceed 43%. Now, it's possible to come up with recall agreements for up to 3 years. After that, they can be annually renewed, but you wouldn't typically have one that exceeds 3 years, at least initially. Now, of course, recalls are not a particular right that faculty have. You have to work them out with a department, with a dean, with another administrator, or so on. And these recalls have to actually be formally approved. And they'll route their way from a department to a dean's office, eventually to academic affairs. Not all recalls, by the way, have to be paid. A lot of people are on a without salary 0% recall as well. But it's still important to formally request that recall. And there are insurance reasons for doing that. So even though you can, as we'll talk about, remain engaged, with your department, with your colleagues and all that, if you have work that you're going to do, even if it's unpaid, there does have to be some type of formal agreement. Okay, Brad, next slide, please. Now, there are three, obviously, major reasons why faculty get recalled: for teaching, for research, and for service. And I guess from where I sit, research is probably the most common reason, followed by teaching, followed by service. But far and away, it's really for research. Okay, next slide. Now let's start by talking about teaching. People can be invited back to teach either within the academic year or within the summer sessions. And I suspect that this has actually become more common since COVID has happened, when faculty, particularly those with children or their caregivers, need assistance with teaching. And so, we've encouraged deans and department chairs to encourage retired faculty to come back and do additional teaching and help relieve some of the burden that exists on faculty who are caregivers and find it difficult to try to achieve a work-life balance in this particular unusual era. Faculty have also been recalled into the Education Abroad program, though. If you are in the medical school or the veterinary school, you could be recalled if you want to do clinical service. That is certainly not an uncommon thing that I see as well, because there's often a shortage of academics who are in highly specialized clinical disciplines. So we will often get requests for retired faculty to come back and help out with some of that clinical work. How much one earns when you are recalled is based on, obviously the percentage up to 43%, and then what your final employed salary was. So let's say 43% of your final salary, not 43% of what your salary was when you were initially hired, at UC Davis. And this is going to vary, depending on what department you're in, what college you're in, and so on. And also if you were on some type of extramural funding to do teaching, what that can afford. Okay, next slide, Brad, please. Now, again, the most common reason for getting recalled is for research. Now, space always becomes an issue. Space is always an issue, whether you're retired or not retired. But nobody who is retired has an intrinsic right to space. How much space may be available to you after you've retired and you are recalled depends on availability of space and the needs within a department or an organized research unit. And typically, we've encouraged deans to have some type of space committee and space allocation plan to avoid, let's say, misunderstandings down the road. So if you're going to be recalled from retirement, you have to negotiate the space that you would get with the chair or director. So again, there's no automatic entitlement to it. And often it can become, a little bit difficult to find space, because space, when it frees up, needs to be allocated to new faculty who are coming in as well. So again, work this stuff out, with your chair and, if necessary, with your dean. Now, when people retire and they want to continue to get extramural grants, there is at least an impression, and I don't know, but for all I know, it's quite true, that they may have less success at getting such extramural funding if they're listed as Professor Emerita or Professor Emeritus. Therefore, we have a working title that people can use that is called Research Professor, and that is something that people can put on their grant applications in order to continue to get extramurally funded work, even after they are retired and are on active recall as well. So to the extent that it may be strategically advantageous to use the research professor working title instead of the actual title of Professor Emerita or Professor Emeritus, you are welcome to do that. Okay, next slide, please. Now, funds in UC Davis accounts, this also has become sometimes a source of contention. All of the money in a UC Davis account actually belongs to the university. It is not your own personal money. That funding actually is under the dean's control. And importantly, it has to be used for university purposes. So you can't use money that remains in a university account, even if it's of a gift fund, even if it's an academic enrichment fund, to do things like travel, take vacations, buy personal property that you want to keep, and so on. It all has to be used for university purposes. So when there is leftover money in a university account, it behooves you to develop an MOU in consultation with your department chair and with your dean about how that money should remain, how it can be used. It's a good idea to do this before you actually retire so that there are no misunderstandings later on. Okay, let's see. Yeah, next slide, please. Now, many people obviously have extramural funding for particular grants, and the management of the funds on those extramural grants are generally your purview as a principal investigator through the term of the grant. In other words, you don't have to worry that if you've got this extramural funding and you retire, that suddenly that money will be either turned back over to an extramural funder or taken by the dean and used to be something else. Those funds were obviously intended to be used for the purpose that they were granted and can continue to be used so with that. Again, have conversations with the department chair or with a dean about that, just so that there are no misunderstandings later on. And of course, you're going to want to stay in touch with the sponsor of the grants as well, so that they're fully aware of what is going on. Now, the other kinds of accounts, though, that exists, the gift fund accounts, the academic enrichment funds, like I said, need to be established with an understanding through an MOU. The MOU should be agreed upon by your own department chair, and it should be agreed upon by the dean as well. These MOUs are supposed to have an expiration date. Typically, we recommend that they not be any longer than 3 years, but they could be extended as well if necessary. Now, we provided some guidance about this, again, to avoid the misunderstandings that have occurred in the past. And I've put down the Academic Affairs website for that. Let me just reiterate one more time, though, because we've had some problems with this. You can't be using this thing like, for vacations or personal purposes whatsoever. It all has to be pursuant to the mission of the university. Okay, Brad, next slide, please.
Phil, before we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to pause for a second. We have a couple of questions in the chat that I'm hoping you
Oh, okay.
The first question is, can all emeriti use the research professor title, or does this require formal recall and associated paperwork first?
No, there shouldn't be. Well, let me put it this way: if you are going to be working on a grant, then you should be recalled in order to work on that grant. Even if you are not paid off the grant, if you are doing university research, university teaching, or university service, you need to be recalled. Okay, so I hope I made that clear. Then what was the other part of the question, Brad?
The other part was, does it require, you said formal recall or associated paperwork? And then there was another question, an additional question about the School of Medicine. With recall, is 43% part of the XYZ plan?
That's a good question. Your total amount of compensation is not supposed to exceed 43% of what it was before, but I would have to actually check to see what would happen with Y and Z. Unless, Kyle, you might know the answer to that.
I don't, unfortunately. This is not one where I am familiar.
Yeah, this sounds like a great question where we can bring that back to academic affairs and our analyst specialists and kind of talk through them what the compensation plan and the XYZ plan, how that plays out with the 43%. So I'll make a note of that so we can connect back with you on it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, you have to, and again, we'll get you confirmation of this, but you have to be, I think, at least 50% in order to be part of the health sciences comp plan. And for Y and Z, you have to be part of the health sciences comp plan. So I actually don't think that somebody who is recalled could be brought back into the health sciences comp plan anyway, which would mean that the 43% would have to be based on your X and your X prime components. But we will verify that for you. So if you could just make a note of that, please, Brad, and we'll see how close I am to the actual truth of what I said. But yeah, I'm almost positive that you have to be 50% to be a member of the health sciences comp plan, and you have to be in that in order to get your Y and your Z components. Okay, and then let me also follow up again. The research professor title is just a working title. So there is no real paperwork to do that. You won't find a title like that listed in like a payroll series. It's just a working title. But please do go through the formal paperwork, electronic paperwork, of course, to get recalled if you're going to be doing research. Okay, did I catch up with everything that was in chat, Brad?
Looks like we have. So I think we're ready to move on to the service element of recall.
Fabulous. Okay, so if you are recalled for service, there are a number of different roles that people can serve in. For example, a department chair, a department vice chair, a graduate group chair, and even an associate dean. And interestingly enough, one of my predecessors in my position is now currently a department vice chair as well. So there are still opportunities to do administrative work even after formal retirement. And now, in addition to that, people can be brought back out of retirement for doing other kinds of things like faculty assistant to somebody who is also in administration. And I know people who have done that. So for example, a faculty assistant to the chancellor or to the provost. And then academic affairs will sometimes need faculty to participate in certain kinds of investigations. And we sometimes will ask faculty who have retired to come back and take on that work, either in a paid or an unpaid basis as well. So you can see that there are still a number of ways administratively to remain engaged after you retire. Okay, next slide, please. Now, emeriti faculty, those now, and I'm really talking about members of the Academic Senate, although I'll move off that in a little bit, are still members of the Academic Senate, which means that they have inherent rights that I will continue to talk about and come back to. They should be informed about faculty meetings. They are welcome to attend faculty meetings. Some departments allow emeriti faculty to actually vote, others do not. And so if you are curious to see if your department allows that or not, you just have to ask your department chair whether or not the voting rights have already been extended to faculty who have retired. The campus has an emeritus committee, which deals with all kinds of emeriti issues as well. And as I said, emeriti are often asked to serve on other standing or special committees, some academic senate committees or even ad hoc committees as well. Now, if this is something that you are interested in, you can be proactive about it and reach out to Edwin Arevalo. He is the executive director of the UC Davis division of the Academic Senate. And so I've put down his contact information below. And if you haven't worked with Edwin, he's a wonderful person, and I'm sure he would welcome hearing from you about whether or not there are any opportunities to continue to work within the Academic Senate. Okay, next slide, please. Now, if you're not in the Academic Senate, it is also still possible to request emeritus status, emeritus status, but you have to meet these following criteria, and these are hard criteria. They're really not negotiable. First, you have to have served in the series that you're seeking emeritus status of for at least 10 years. And occasionally we get a request for somebody who's been in one, let's say 8 years, and it doesn't work. It really has to be 10 years in the series that you're seeking this status for. You have to reach the highest rank of that particular series, which means that, let's say, and I'm just going to make this up hypothetically, but let's say that you are a project scientist. You can't be granted emeritus status if you are an assistant or an associate project scientist. You have to reach the highest rank of that series. And that applies to all of the series as well. And then finally, there has to be evidence of noteworthy and meritorious contributions to the educational mission of the university. So that typically when somebody would like this type of status, they'll work with their department chair to write a letter that attests to the noteworthy and the meritorious contributions to the educational mission. So this initiates at the department level, and then it would go to the dean, and then it would go to CAP or the JPC, depending on the title. And then it would come to academic affairs for a recommendation. And then the final approval or non-approval rests only with the chancellor. Now, if you're curious to know more of the details about this, APM 120, which is easily discoverable at the Academic Affairs website, outlines the whole review process. Again, exceptions to this, while theoretically possible, are almost invariably not granted. If the chancellor was to even recommend an exception, which I have not seen our chancellor do, then they would have to go to UCOP and would be unlikely to be granted there. So I just say this in the interest of full transparency. You know, we had one of these probably about 6 months ago where one of those 3 bullet points was not achieved, and it wasn't able to go through, unfortunately. But these are hard and fast rules that the regents have approved. Okay, next slide. Other ways that people can remain engaged. Serving on dissertation committees, and a lot of our retired faculty do that. And by the way, if you have graduate students that you are, let's say, the major professor for, or you're on their committee now, and you choose to retire, you can stay that way. There is no requirement that you vacate any of those responsibilities or positions simply because you choose to retire. You're as valuable after retirement as you are before retirement. You can remain an advisor. You can counsel students as well. You can become involved in emeritus association activities, and then also events through the retirement center. Oh, and thanks, Kyle, for providing the link to APM 120. It's a great idea to read, by the way, and familiarize yourself with. So these are other ways to stay engaged at UC Davis. I'm going to give you another really, really good example in a moment. Okay, Brad, next slide, please. Now, the Emeriti Association, it's membership based. It's only $25 a year, or you could just not worry about remembering, and just lifetime is $200 as well. And this is a terrific organization that supports our retired faculty at UC Davis, our retired academics actually at UC Davis. It leads Emeriti advocacy efforts for benefits, which are really important. That advocacy needs to be enduring in order for these benefits, frankly, to be enduring. They have what are called brain food talks, lectures led by recently retired faculty, still about their research. There are board positions available. They manage the Emeriti Video Records Project as well. And then they help keep Emeriti and retiree parking going at UC Davis. So this is one of the most tangible benefits that faculty who have retired really, really like to have. I'll come back to this in a moment. But this is really important. So having this advocacy organization is really, really helpful to all people, and I would strongly urge you to join it upon retirement. Kyle knows a lot about this as well. And so if you have any questions, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you even more about this. Okay, Brad, next slide, please. Okay, now I made an allusion to this. This is through CPE, AKA University Extension. That was their former name. So they've got this Osher Lifetime Learning Institute, which is in a sense really continuing education so that you can remain intellectually engaged. Or if you've never had a chance to delve into areas that you would have loved to before, but you're too busy with your own career at UC Davis, that probably applies to virtually everybody, then you can go to this center and for a relatively nominal fee, start learning about things that you've always wanted to, but have never had time to. And this is a really cost-efficient way to do that because, I know that I see advertised in the New York Times, all these, like major courses that are taught by people, but they're really, really expensive. And this is not only can faculty take these courses, by the way, but if you really feel like it, you can teach these kinds of classes as well. And I can, tell you that it can be a really fulfilling thing to do. My dad was a high school teacher. He taught poli-sci and history. He retired when he was 55, and lo and behold, he's still doing this kind of teaching, but to retired people, at a local center. So he loves doing that stuff. And a lot of our faculty want to continue to teach as well, but now they're teaching to other retired faculty too. And by being a member of the Emeritus Association, you get a discount for doing it. Now, I'm just going to give you a quick idea of the kinds of classes that people are offering. And so, I opened up this course catalog. You can see the one on the right, winter 2002. So if you go to the next slide, Brad, please. So I just took photographs of what's happening next quarter, and you can see that there's a myriad of topics that is available. And I really want to thank and recognize the Center for Professional Education for doing this too. So, you can see these various categories here. I'll just throw out a few of them, photography, wine, North Korea, Tokyo, and music. Of course, I'm not seeing anything in here about, romantic classical music of the late 19th century, but maybe we can rectify that in some way later. But there's other kinds of music things in here, the Donner Summit, and so on. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff actually that you should feel welcome to take advantage of, when you retire. So this strikes me as a really, really great benefit. Okay, I'm almost done. Again, just to recapitulate, you've got the right then to use the emeritus or emerita title, the right to continued department and Senate membership, serving on department and Senate committees, serving on student committees, mentoring students, advising students, the potential for recall or doing volunteer work in teaching research service. And again, if your department allows it, voting rights as well. Okay, Brad, next slide, please. Now, some other things I would be remiss if I didn't mention. You will get the right to continue to use your UC Davis email address, the email services that the university offers, and the UC Davis directory listings. So, nobody wants to lose their UC Davis email address, especially if you're like me, you've had it now for like over 30 years and it's the only one you ever use. So you get to keep that. You get to keep library privileges as well. You get to download software that the university allows you to, and you get access to the e-journals as well. So there's no need to walk away from your intellectual curiosity and your intellectual resources just because you retire. You are eligible to serve as PI on grants, and many of our faculty that are retired are PIs on grants. They don't want to stop, and they don't stop. Which is just wonderful to see. Now, currently there are no plans to discontinue university support to help mitigating the cost of medical and dental insurance, as well as benefits through the healthcare facilitator program. I hope it stays that way. Like I said, there are no plans to discontinue that at all. So that's certainly positive news. Okay, more on the next slide, please. You have access to the Foreign Travel Accident and Assistance Program. And this is a big one. You've got access to free parking. Now, in the past, I could have told you a bit more detail about what that would actually entail in the special type of permit. But now that we don't have permits anymore, and we've got the new system, which I always forget the name of, you will get access to free parking through that. But exactly how that's going to look remains, I think, to be determined. Kyle is monitoring all that. And so you're going to be able to get more information about that benefit in the coming months from the Retiree Center. But know that you will still have it. It's just not entirely clear exactly how that will work. Okay, you will remain eligible for advice from Fidelity with respect to the investment and the retirement planners. You'll get access to campus venues at the same cost as active employees, and you've got these resources to help you in navigating retirement as well. And I've put the link to that at the Retiree Center at the very bottom of this slide. And with that, next slide, Brad. I am pretty much done, and I can see that there are a bunch of things in chat, but I can't read them. So Brad will be able to help me with that. I do want to point you to the Academic Affairs website under retirements and recalls. We try to keep this information as up to date as possible. So please feel welcome to utilize that site. There's also the UC Davis Emeriti Association website as well for you to use. We encourage you to use your resources in making informed decisions. And finally, every year things change, and I'm pretty sure that I'm confident that these links work, but sometimes the subject matter changes a little bit. And so if there are things that you would like to see covered in the future, or you have additional questions, please share that through the feedback that Kyle and Brad will make available to you so that we can improve this and help you further in the future. Academic Affairs, as always, remains your resource. And if you have questions or problems, feel very, very welcome to contact us. We are here for you, and not the other way around. Okay, with that, Brad, if you wouldn't mind then helping with the questions that are in the chat, and maybe we'll see with whatever time it remains available, we can answer them to our best of our ability, okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Actually, there was one question I wanted to ask. You mentioned that Emeriti are able to continue as PIs. Now, how does that work out if somebody is already overseeing an award and is considering retirement perhaps before that award ends, but wants to continue as PI? Does there need to be a break in service, and can they continue doing that after they retire?
Yeah, there's supposed to be a formal break in service, but it can only, it doesn't have to be more than 30 days. So in a situation like that, I would reach out to the sponsor of the grant and make sure that they are fully in the loop about it. And then I would reach out to the department to make sure that they can manage what happens in this 30-day transitional period to make sure that everything continues to be done.
Great, thank you. I'm looking through the chat right now. I also wanted to offer the option for folks to unmute themselves and they can continue, as well as continue asking questions via chat. Let's see. If you, someone mentioned if you are in a hospital, are you still able to maintain your email address?
I'm sorry, if you're hospitalized?
If you are, I believe if you're at the school med and hospital, are you able to maintain your email address?
So if it's the UC Davis email address and you have emeritus status, yes. Now, I am not familiar with the email system that exists within the health system. And so I'm not qualified to answer that particular question.
I can jump in, Phil, if you'd like.
Sure.
So for any staff or faculty at the hospital, our understanding is that they would not have continued access to that email. However, I do think if you are in a recall position, you would be eligible. And I need to double check on the emeritus titles on the medical center side. So let me follow up. Who asked that question? Let's see. We will make sure you get an answer, Diane, about that. You bet.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and my gut is telling me no, just because of confidentiality laws around health information.
Yep.
Okay.
And Brad, what would be a great thing is if we could capture all of these questions, which are really, really good, and I suspect other people will have in the future, and add these to like an FAQ section of our website.
That sounds like a good plan. I'm already working on that right now, actually, because there are some really great follow-up questions and great overall questions. We do have another question from Barb. What are the best practices for an academic to notify their department? And Barb, I'm going to ask a quick clarifying question. Do you mean notifying a department of retirement? Is that the goal about notification?
Yeah, that's right. Notifying them of your intent to retire.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that, Phil?
Well, best practices, Barb. I don't know, but I'm going to give you my own opinion. Having just dealt with a situation where somebody retired with almost no advance notice in a clinical area where there was no other coverage, which led to an emergency hire. If at the point that I plan to retire, I'm planning to tell my department chair a year in advance, so that if my position is to be replaced, the school would have plenty of time to do that. And I know in vet med that I see recruitments going on for people who are still here and may not retire a year or two later, but they want to try to cover that now so that there can even be disciplinary overlap and mentoring. So personally, Barb, I really think the earlier that somebody can provide that kind of information, the better, just as a collegial thing to do so that the university and especially the dean and the chairs can plan for that. And you don't have a gap in an area that is particularly critical, whether it's a clinical area or whether it's a course, let's say, that is essential to offer that somehow you can't offer it because there isn't somebody there. There wasn't enough time to bring people in. If something like that was to happen, of course, academic affairs would do its best to work, with the deans to try to get emergency coverage on very short notice. We can actually do search waivers in emergency situations like that. But obviously, everybody would prefer to not have to do it as an emergency and to plan well ahead of time. So that's my sort of extended answer to a best practice. And of course, that gives you plenty of time, I think, to have a discussion about putting together MOUs, about recall, if you meet those retirement age criteria, about what to do with your leftover funding in your accounts, whether it's to be used to support for, students or additional work if you want to be recalled and so on. I think it's a great thing to be able to give a lot of advance notice. Having been on the other side where sometimes people have exited with 2 weeks notice, it causes severe pain. So
Yes.
I'll just throw that out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Brad?
Not right now, Phil. I want to give folks a little bit more of an opportunity. Are there any other questions, or comments, thoughts that you would like to share with Phil? Because right now we have plenty of time, and it looks like we've reached the end of our questions in the chat.
But I see, it looks like David wants to ask me a question. David.
Phil, I'd love to. How are you? Phil, thanks so much for that. That was so revealing. Can you help me to understand, can one be recalled only after they reach the age of 60 or only if they retire after the age of 60?
Well, you are eligible to retire after the age of 50, actually. And you are eligible to be recalled after you retire, provided that there be a 30-day break in service.
Okay. So if I should retire at 59 and have my 30-day break in service, I could be I could be recalled before the age of 60.
Yeah, but here's the thing, David. You would be falling into that caveat where you can't actually talk about being recalled because you haven't reached the age of 60 yet. So you see what I mean? And I know this is somewhat of an odd rule, and Kyle and I have gone back and forth about this, but because you were hired before 2013, right? I know that. That's a statement. David and I are in the same school and we work a lot together. That's why I know that. But because you are not going to be 60 when you retire, presumably, you cannot have a discussion with the chair and the dean about being recalled until 30 days after your retirement has gone by. Now, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
The age part is what's throwing me for a loop, Phil. But it's certainly a 30-day period, and it's actually 30 days, or actually It's when you receive your first pension check. So assuming that your first pension check arrives on time, that's where you're eligible to start conversations for recall. And I'm double checking, Phil, on that resource I sent you the other day about the age component. So if you give me a minute, I'll have a better answer for you, David.
Thank you both so much.
Sure. Yeah, that if I recall, that resource said that if you're in, our UCRP cohort, you can start talking about recall when you hit 60.
Okay, so last call for questions for Phil. Thanks everyone so far for the great questions in chat and unmuting yourself and asking some wonderful questions. I just want to give folks one last opportunity.
Well, maybe one last opportunity today, but like I said, if you need to reach out to me, I'm very easy to reach. And if you don't hear back from me within 24 hours, please email again.
And Phil, you were spot on with the way you described it.
Okay.
Almost verbatim. And I put the document, the UC returning to UC employment after retirement document in the thread here. So you all have that as well, which is not the APM text, but it is the general text that they give to folks that are considering recall, whether they be staff or faculty. Awesome.
Excellent. Excellent. And as Phil said, we're very contactable in academic affairs. You're more than welcome to send any questions you have to our office, and then we will endeavor to kind of consolidate some of the questions that we've received today and then provide everyone the FAQs and the answers.
Well, Brad and Phil, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great way to end the series for 2022. We look forward to doing this again next year and maybe even do some sort of refresher course in the fall for folks, which we're looking to kind of add into our agenda. To everyone in attendance, as per usual, I am going to send you a survey link. This is particularly important for this one, and I know I've stressed that its importance the entire time, but particularly important for the final session because it asks you to evaluate the entire series and gives us an idea of what we're looking at for next year when we go into planning. I've just dropped the link to that survey into the chat, so if you do want to click on it now while everything's fresh in your mind, you're more than welcome. You'll also receive an email, usually within 10 minutes from me, asking you to evaluate this session. If you do have any questions that are non-academic personnel related and they're related to your retirement, our office is a great resource for you. We can't always answer everything directly, but we can always point you in the right direction and connect you with the person who can. We have folks that have had very smooth retirements the last couple of years. We have had folks that have had some issues, including some administrators on campus. So if you are having a struggle early on in your retirement process, the best thing you can do is reach out to our office early. I have the tools at my disposal to help move that forward for you at a quicker pace than calling a 1-800 number with the RASC. And we do our part to try and make sure that your retirements move as smoothly as possible. So if you do have issues, you can reach out to me directly or have someone reach out to me directly, and we'll do everything we can to help get that solved. And the RASC has worked really hard with us over the last year to give us a toolkit with which we can get you answers much quicker than just sending you to a 1-800 number or an online system. So keep that in mind. You will get an email from me with the survey, and it also is going to have the link to the Transitioning to Retirement website with all the recordings and everything that you need to reflect on these last 4 weeks. Awesome. Well, thank you, Phil. Thank you, Brad. That was great and a good way to close out. And thank you, Julianne, for supporting us through this as always. And if you don't know, Julianne is the backbone of our organization. So she does all the heavy lifting in our office and makes it easy on everybody else. So we appreciate that a lot. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Here, everyone.